Welcome to our plant talk again. This time we are going to talk about an unusual group of plants. They are parasites, and the word seems scary to many, but I'm going to persuade you that they are actually, many of them at least, are harmless and quite interesting, cute plants. And we have been talking a little bit about them because in my previous lecture, I looked at this group of plants that look quite unusual, but they are common plants in our forest. They are called Indian pipe. And these are ones that are completely deficient or devoid of chlorophyll. And they manage to exist in the woods without producing their own sugars because they cannot do any photosynthesis like that without chlorophyll. And we learned that the way they make their living is by stealing a little bit of sugars from the surrounding plants. And also, we learned about the fascinating ways they do it. Uh, they steal from the feeding pipes. Uh, we talked a little bit about mycorrhiza. That's the fungus hypha that penetrates through uh, everything underneath the forest litter in the soil, and they are rather ubiquitous in every forest. These are the thin threads, fungus hyphae, that are the um, underground parts of those mushrooms that we like to collect in the forest. And there exists a mutually beneficial relationship between these mushrooms and the trees under which the mushrooms grow. So the fungus, the mushroom, provides some inorganic substances to the surrounding trees, and the trees in return provide sugars that they make through photosynthesis to the mushroom. And these are received through the fungus hypha, those thin threads that attach themselves to the tree roots. And so, what these little cheaters do, I mean, the Indian pipe, they attach themselves to the fungus hypha and steal a little bit of sugar. And so, this tactics has gained an official name of cheating. This is an official scientific term now. So we now know a little bit more about these unusual plants and know that the official strategy is cheating, is stealing sugars uh, from the fungus hypha, but because uh, the fungus in its turn receives the sugars from the trees, it happens that the ultimate source of sugar for these Indian pipes are actually trees that surround them. And Indian pipe have these unusual relatives. They are a little bit less common than Indian pipes, but also quite common in our forest, especially under pines. Um, these are called pine sap, and they have multiple flowers, and they are orange and yellow. They are quite colorful. They look um, a little different from Indian pipes does, but you can tell they are related. And just like Indian pipes, they don't have any chlorophyll, and they uh, they employ just a similar strategy, and that's how they survive. They attach to the fungus, and that way they receive nutrition from the surrounding trees. Another example like this. Uh, this is the least common of them all, but you can also find them uh, in our forest. This is the red colored relatives, and it's upright, but all of them become upright when they produce fruit. And this is the plant in fruit. Uh, they all belong to his family. But in his family, there are also this group of plants. This is another common plant of our forest, and you see it's called spotted wintergreen or striped pipsisseва. And you see that striped pipsisseва has green leaves. And so you wouldn't think of it when you look at it, you wouldn't think it is a parasitic plant. But actually it is. It is hemiparasitic, means partially parasitic on the surrounding plants. It has this nodding porcelain white flowers with the stout stamens and striped leaves. So spotted is a misnomer, but this is a translation from Latin because maculata, Haemophila maculata, means spotted, and Hema stands for winter and Phila stands for love. So winter lover or wintergreen, meaning that the plant is evergreen. It's green in winter. So the spotted wintergreen is also a cheater, meaning that it is stealing sugars from the surrounding plants. We call such plants that are capable of both photosynthesis and parasitic having parasitic traits, mixotrophic, meaning that they are feeding both ways. They are producing their own sugar and they are borrowing sugar from another plant. So this is the same plant at an earlier stage of development with winter buds and younger leaves. I hope you recognize that it's quite a common feature of our forest, even in the forest surrounding our buildings at the New Bridge here. This is photographed in Stony Brook Reservation, and you see there are dead oak leaves, so it must have been parasitic on oaks through the mycorrhizal, of course. There's another example in the grass, growing in the grass here. And the same plant producing fruit. This is a view from the top down. And you see this is on the beaches. These are beach leaves. These are little fruits. They are still green, not yet ripe. They become brown with age and quite sturdy. And this photograph is supposed to demonstrate that this plant is evergreen because it was taken in February and you see the leaves are still on, only they acquired this bronze coloration as many evergreen plants do in winter. And here is another closely related Haemophila, another species of Haemophila. This is called also wintergreen or pipsisseва. And this is Haemophila umbellata. Umbellata means umbrella-like, meaning that the inflorescence has a different shape, and the leaves are quite different. They are very glossy. There is no variegation, and they have little teeth on the margin. If you ask me how many Haemophilas are there worldwide, there are not so many. There are only 5 species worldwide, so they can all comfortably fit on their ranges can be shown on one map. Here you can see everything that we have within our planet-wise. And it turns out in Asia there is this Chinese and Japanese and Korean species showed in yellow here called Chimaphila japonica. And then there is another one, Chimaphila monticola, with a very tiny area only on Taiwan and a little area in China. And then in North America, there is this western species shown in red here on the west coast with a relatively small range. And then the two that are familiar to us on the east coast. And the one that we looked at, the very first one was Chimaphila maculata with striped pipsissia that showed in blue. And you see that it has two different parts to its range, two subspecies. And then finally, the most interesting, the most widespread in the world is the last one we looked at, that was Chimaphila umbellata, or pipsissia. And you see that it has three parts covering a large area in North America, but in addition to that, a huge range in Eurasia covering all of Europe pretty much, and stretching all the way through Siberia into China and the Russian Far East, and even to Japan. So that's about Chimaphila worldwide. So you see, Chimaphila is a common native species all across the northern hemisphere. These photographs are supposed to prove that. This one was taken in Europe, in European part of Russia, and that one is coming from Siberia, Asiatic Russia. You see, it's quite the same plant, the same species. So it does have a huge, huge, beautiful range. And another group of plants from the same subfamily of Ericaceae are shin leaves. You probably recognize this one because it has very distinctive round-shaped leaves. They are called shin leaves because they were used by Native Americans and then by the Europeans as a medicinal plant. They were used in plasters and applied to wounds, and hence the name shin leaf. The leaves were used in plasters. It's another very beautiful small plant with nodding white porcelain flowers. The Latin name is Pyrula or Pyrula americana, and this one photographed in Plymouth County in Miles Standish State Forest. Again, this plant is hemi-parasitic on the surrounding species, and at the same time it's capable of photosynthesis because it has green leaves too. The leaves are evergreen, as you can see here. This was photographed after it overwintered at the beginning of spring. And the flowers, if you bend down and look very closely and look underneath, because they are nodding, they look like this with very long and curving pistils and stout stamens. And they are asymmetric like that. I mean, a little bit lopsided. This is the fruit. Some of them were abortive here, but others developed nicely, not quite yet ripe. So it's the beginning of August, but in September they are already ripe. And this beauty used to grow in western Massachusetts, but not anymore. It is historic in our state. It's pink wintergreen. But it's quite widespread in other areas in North America, and these photographs I took in Colorado. So this I couldn't provide you a photograph from Massachusetts because it doesn't grow in Massachusetts anymore. Here you can compare the distribution uh, in within North America of American sheen leaf and pink wintergreen. And you see, one is eastern species, the other is all across North America, the pink one. But what they have in common, these areas, is that they are widespread very far north. See, American sheen leaf goes to Labrador, and pink wintergreen goes also to Labrador and to the very northern parts of Canada and Alaska. And these are northerners in our flora. These plants are all connected with the northern biome, northern type of forest. It's dark coniferous forest called taiga, and it consists of uh, firs, spruces, and hemlock, of which we mostly have hemlocks in eastern Massachusetts here. This is another species of sheen leaf with differently shaped leaves, elliptic sheen leaf. And yet another one with tiny little leaves, sized about the size of a quarter each leaf, and greenish flowers. So it's called green flowered sheen leaf. And that one um, is probably the most rare species in our part of Massachusetts. It was connected with old hemlock forest and pines. It was growing under pines and oaks here, as you can tell. But this is the area where a very old hemlock stand is still preserved intact. So I think it has to do with old hemlocks. It's in Boxford, which is north of Boston. So again, it's a northern species in our flora. Here's another example of the same species, Paralachlorantha from Walden Pond, Concord. I collected this sample. And as you can see, this smallest of them all has the widest area of them all. It includes both Alaska and Labrador and all of Canada, and is widespread also all across the United States, including only the southern and southeastern parts of North America. And if you look at the family Ericaceae, you'll see that sheen leaves here and Indian pipe and its relatives here are closely related. They are now treated as parts of Ericaceous family, his family, but formerly they were treated as separate family. So within this family, you can trace this evolutionary trend going from normal green plants to mixotrophic or hemiparasitic plants and to entirely parasitic. And so you can imagine how it could happen through the plant evolution that plants lost their chlorophyll. Because if some ancestor of these plants, like Chemophilus, like these wintergreens, was able to attach itself to the fungus hypha and receive nutrition through this feeding pipe. Then when at some point it happened that there was a mutation, a deviation in genetic of the plant, and it was produced by nature made a mistake and produced this strange plant that was lacking all of chlorophyll. Uh, in other circumstances, such a plant would immediately die without chlorophyll. But in this situation where it was already connected to the pipe, it turned out that lack of chlorophyll wasn't uh, wasn't a problem for the plant. And more than that, probably that plant received some advantage over its neighbors because it didn't spend energy uh, and didn't spend resources on producing green leaves and still survived. So that plant didn't die and left progeny. It produced flowers, fruits, and produced progeny. And because it was beneficial, uh, this became widespread in the population. And that's how you can imagine the appearance of such strange creatures as Indian pipe is. So this happened within this family, but then the interesting thing is that it happened many times in nature, not only in the his family, but in other families too. So let's now uh, go ahead and look at this picture again. I think we already looked at it. The left part shows the situation that we have been just talking about. Here is our Indian pipe. You can call it myco-heterotrophic plant. All the plants in on our planet can all the organisms actually can be divided into two major groups. The ones that can produce sugars for themselves, they are called autotrophic plants, meaning feeding uh, on their own by themselves. And these are only green plants that are capable of that. And all the rest of the organisms on the planet would be called, as opposed to autotrophic, heterotrophic, meaning feeding with the help of others, other than themselves. And so all the animals, including human beings, are heterotrophic organisms. And now it turns out that some plants are also heterotrophic, like Indian pipe would be heterotrophic organism because it cannot produce its own nutrition. It has to be dependent on other plants. But because it does it through the mycorrhiza, through the fungus here, it's called mycoheterotrophic. And so it is connected with this tree, with the autotrophic plant through the mycorrhizal connection, mycorrhizal fungus here that helps feed the little Indian pipe. But now let's look at this right part of this drawing. Here you can see another mycoheterotrophic plant. It looks different from Indian pipe. And it's also connected to the fungus, but the difference here is that the fungus is not connected to the living tree. Instead, it grows on a dead trunk. Here is a dead tree, and the fungus is capable of digesting substances that it gets from this dead trunk. And such type of nutrition is called saprophytic. So this is a saprophytic fungus. And the plant on the left is still mycoheterotrophic, only it's connected with a different fungus. So let's look at this plant, what it looks like in reality, not on the drawing. It looks exactly the same, right? And this is an orchid, yes. So orchids can also be parasitic on surrounding organisms and get their nutrition through the mycorrhiza. And within orchid family, the connection with mycorrhiza plays very important part. Every single orchid at the beginning of its life is connected to the mycorrhiza. But then some of them become completely independent and start producing their own sugar, but others are half and half. So they retain the connection with the fungus, but they also start doing their own sugars, just like wintergreens or shin leaves. And you see that this orchid is called pale coral root. It is quite pale, so it has a little bit of chlorophyll, but not um, quite large amount. So it's kind of yellowish green, and, and the fact that it grows in such dark habitat tells us that it is not fully dependent on the amount of light. It doesn't need a lot of light because it has another source of nutrition. And this kind of nutrition is a special type of mycorrhiza. You can see the same plant here at the left in fruit. In fruit, it actually becomes more green than in flower. So you can tell that this plant is green, is capable of doing its own sugar, making its own sugar. It's leafless too, and it grows only on a certain fungus of the genus Tomentella and can survive, as I already said, in relatively dark habitats because of that. And so among orchids, parasitism is quite a widespread thing. Many orchids, partially or some of them entirely, survive due to their connection with fungus. Well, as to coral root, it has a huge area as many of these hemiparasitic plants have. This is its area in North America. You can see again, it's a northern species that goes as far north as Greenland, even farther than the previous ones. And the enclaves in the south are all connected with mountains. So it's in the south, it's in the mountains, or in this taiga and tundra regions in the north. And if you look across the globe, it's all around the northern pole. It has even larger area in the old world, which covers Russia, China, Japan, Korea, India, Nepal, Kashmir, Pakistan, and almost every country in Europe. So this type of distribution we call circumpolar. It has circumpolar distribution, very large distributional area. Very impressive plant. But every orchid, as I said, at the very young stage has connection with the fungus. And the reason for that is the size of orchid seed. Orchid seeds are often called dust seeds. They are probably the tiniest seeds of all plants, among all plants. And all they have is a tiny embryo and a cover. And there is no nutritional stock for the development of seed. You know that normally in every seed there is some stock of nutrition that's called endosperm, and it helps the development of the embryo at the very initial stages. But that's not the case with the orchids. Orchids, because the seeds are so tiny, they don't have that at all. And so the embryo is totally dependent on the outside sources of nutrition in order to start its development. And so for the orchid, the connection with mycorrhiza at these young stages of seed development is totally mandatory. Without mycorrhiza, the seed cannot start growing. Here you can see the micro photograph showing the seed that is starting development due to this very thin hyphals, this fungal threads that are helping the little seed to grow. And Orchids have developed a special structure for that. That's unique only for orchids. It's called protocorm, and it's this uh, little outgrowths, but they are not yet roots. These outgrowths just help the seed to form the connection with the fungus. And once this connection is formed, uh, the fungus starts supplying uh, food for the little embryo, and only then the first leaf starts to develop. And so you can imagine that's why it's so difficult for us to tame orchids, because orchids are so completely dependent on certain fungi uh, to start growing, that in order to grow an orchid, you have to provide the right fungus for them. And it's not an easy task. But this task is actually has been tackled by Smithsonian Institution together with New York Botanic Garden. They formed this North American Orchid uh, National Collection. They are trying to develop it. That's Orchid Center. North American Orchid Center.org. Can you see this link? If you go there, you can read a little bit how they are going about this challenging task of preserving some 200 of North American orchids. So they want to develop both the seed bank and the living collection, and that way preserve the species of every single orchid, be it a rare species or common species. But in order to do that, they have to develop a parallel collection of appropriate fungi and grow the fungi together with orchids. So this is a very unusual and challenging approach, and it's a very interesting scientific direction nowadays, and direction in plant conservation. Now, I apologize that I don't have very many examples of parasitic orchids. That's precisely because orchids are not so common, and among orchids, there are more about common native orchids. There are more species that drop their connection with the fungus at their maturity. And so the only example that I could fetch for you for the lecture today was pale coral root, but there are others. I just have you just have to believe me, because we are now moving on from the orchid family to a new family within which we can also trace this development of parasitism from this green plant that are hemiparasitic to these plants that are presented here in the lower at the lower level, that are completely devoid of chlorophyll and entirely parasitic on other plants. And this is broom rape family, or the family Orobanchaceae. They are Orobanchaceae are named after this plant, Orobancha or broom rape. But let's start from the green ones. It's just logical to start with hemiparasitic plant and then go to totally or holoparasitic plants. So the first one on our agenda will be this Gerardia plant. There are a few species of Gerardia around here, maybe half a dozen species, but we will sorry, we will start with another one. This is this one, Pedicularis, wood bethany. That's where we're starting. And wood bethany is an interesting you can tell that this plant is quite unusual in the flower arrangement too. It's quite interesting when you look at it from the top down. It has these beautiful leaves, and the plants on which it is parasitic are not fully known because, it's not so easy to trace. There are some examples the scientists have figured out, for example, that can be parasitic on little blue stem, which is a very common grass around here. But for example, in this case, I found it in the forest where there was no little blue stem around. There is lowbush blueberry, there is Canada Mayflower, for example, and there are oaks, um, but there is no little blue stem around. This plant also further amazed researchers because it was found to have three different ways the way it feeds themselves. First of all, it is capable of photosynthesis, so it's partially autotrophic plant. Then it forms the mycorrhiza just the way other plants form the mycorrhizas, also of a different type, not the same type as orchid mycorrhiza, and neither the type of ericaceous or his family mycorrhiza. It's another type. But then this plant is capable of directly taking nutrients from its host. For that purpose, it develops special organ that's called haustoria. They are kind of looking like roots, but they're not roots. They're a different organ that helps the plant to attach directly to the roots of its host. And this type of nutrition is typical for the entire family Orobanchaceae to which it belongs. So three types, three different ways this plant provides for itself. Then the other one is the Girardia. As I said, there are a few different Girardias around here in Massachusetts, but let's talk about just one that's called purple Girardia. This is an annual little plant, not so little, maybe 1 foot or a little bit more than 1 foot tall, and it grows around ponds. This is a picture that shows the shore of a pond, a kettle pond in Plymouth, and the pond itself is on the left here. And all the vegetation, as you can see, is surrounding pond in certain stripe manner. So this purple stripe here is entirely composed of purple Girardia. So hence the name, not only the flower color, but also the autumn color that the plant produces around ponds in October. So all these plants is, I have to underline the fact that all these plants have the way that they receive their nutrition is through direct attachment to their host plant. Not through mycorrhiza, but doing without mycorrhiza, except one of them. At least it's not known for other plants. So they attach themselves through the special organ called haustoria. And this is another annual hemiparasitic plant, so meaning that it is green, so it goes for photosynthesis, but then it attaches itself to poplars, maples, lowbush blueberry, and pines. So in this situation, it was growing in Miles Standish State Forest under pines and aspens, in an aspen grove and pine and peach pine. This is the same plant, the way it looks in the fall in fruit. This fruit, the lower fruit are already open and lost the seed, but the upper fruit are still intact and contain seed, and there is even one developing flower at the very top. This is called cowweed, Melampirum lineare. And another plant of the same family is my favorite. It has very melodic Latin name, Aurularia pedicularia. But the common name is very clumsy. It's called yellow fern leaf false foxglove. So this is one case where Latin name is you will be much more comfortable remaining the Latin name rather than its common name. And this is another annual plant. It can get quite large. It's flowering right now in September in in the forests, usually high up on rocks in dry habitats, and it usually grows on the roots of oak trees. This is white oak here, and it's right underneath under white oak. And here it grows on shrubby oak, scrub oak, surrounding the big plant. It can get quite tall. But again, uh, the connection with the host probably prevents us from taming this plant and using it on our front lawns or in the garden. It's not your typical garden plant, and I guess if you planted the seed under some oak, it can be grown in the garden too. But there is no culture. There is no culture of cultivating these plants. Now let's move from hemiparasitic to full parasites. And this is the plant that gave its name to the entire family. In other words, this is the type genus of the family Orobanchaceae. Or in yet another words, you can say that this genus Orobanchaea exemplifies the entire family. I have to explain and tell you a little secret. It's not really a secret. Uh, this family, only some 15 or 20 years ago, it was much smaller than it is now, and it only included completely parasitic plants like Orobanchaea. And after the advancement of molecular biology, a large group of hemiparasitic plants at which we already looked joined this family, and they were moved there from another family, Scrophulariaceae family. And so uh, this family now has grown tremendously as compared to what it looked like some 15 or 20 years ago. So this is the new way in botany to treat these families. So nowadays, uh, broom rape family includes not only complete parasitic plants, but all these hemiparasitic. So speaking about complete parasitic plants, this one, uh, broom rape itself, it's a very delicate small plant that can live on a number of different hosts that include goldenrods, sunflowers, saxifrages, and differently from Indian pipe, it looks a little bit like Indian pipe, but Indian pipe, each plant in Indian pipe consists of just one stalk with a single flower. And here you can see a bunch of stalks, each with one flower, but all these bouquet of flowers uh, is just a single plant. So there is one underground part to this plant. So it can contain multiple flowers. And sometimes it comes out the young one as one flower. So the upper parts of the plants are annual. I'm not sure about the underground part, whether that one is an annual too, but maybe not. But this is called an annual in botanical treatments. So this is an interesting map that I'm going to share with you. This comes from a scientific article, and it shows you a study, the result of the study of the species, two different species, but we are looking at ours, which is called Orobantia uniflora. So what we're looking here at is at this purple contour on the right, which shows one part of its range, and this is segregated as a subspecies. And another western subspecies is the blue contour here. It's called subspecies occidentalis. Occidentalis means western. So western subspecies and the eastern subspecies. What is a subspecies? Well, to put it briefly, subspecies is a developing species. So maybe a few centuries or even maybe earlier down the road, these are going to become two separate species. But right now, scientists prefer to treat them in the rank of two parts of the same species. And the whole purpose of this scientific article was to show how subspecies are evolving and turning into species. Uh, the critical thing here is isolation. You see, they are already geographically isolated because there is a gap in between. But also they are isolated in terms of their hosts. Because see these dots, they are purple here in this eastern part of the range, and purple corresponds here in the legend to the family Asteraceae. So this in this part, in our part of the range, Orobantium mostly was found to live on the plants of Aster family. And that wasn't the case in the western part of the range. There are some purple dots here too, so some of them were living on the Aster family plants, but other dots are different color, saxifrages and even carrot family, Apioidea plants. So that's carrot family. So the range of hosts is different here from the eastern part of the range. Not only this difference, let me show you this beauty. So in the menus, broom rape is told to be either white or purple like this, or even blue. But in our part of the range, at least from my experience, I never found it purple like that, always only white. But it looks like in the western part of the range, it's typically purple and not white. So that's another way to notice the difference between the eastern and western parts. So this photograph is actually taken from the web, from the blog of this person, Tanya Harvey, who is not a professional botanist, but she's a person with a very inquisitive mind. She lives in this Western Cascades Mountains. She says, my home is is out in the country. It's Fall Creek in the Lane County. That makes the Western Cascades my background. So Tanya Harvey not only produced this beautiful picture, she describes broom rape and how she was fascinated by it. And she describes the host plants on which it survives down there in the west, and that's saxifrage here, Micranthus rufidula, and another plant called mist maiden. And both of them occur on the banks of this Kogwa reservoir where she found them in large amounts, and both of them serve as host plants. And they grow there on banks of reservoir on roadside cliffs. And so Tanya decided to actually, she wanted to look at the actual connection to the host plant of this parasitic plant with her own eyes, and not only see this actual connection, but to provide a sample for the herbarium that would demonstrate how this parasitic Aurobankia is connected to its host Miss Maiden or Roman Sophia. So that's the actual result of her research. She dug out this plant on the right, which is broom rape, and this scorched plant on the left is connected, as you can see, to it, and that's Roman Sophia. But she confesses here that she had no time to process them on time and kept them in water for a while, and Roman Sophia did not like it and got scorched. But Orobanche did well, and the only problem was to find the actual haustorium, the organ that keeps them connected, coming from the parasitic plant into Roman Sophia roots. And in this tight conglomerates of roots, it wasn't so easy to discern the haustorium. So she wasn't sure, but she was thinking that this whitish thread-like root that looks different from other roots must represent the haustorium. So I recommend, if you are interested, to just go and read what she has to tell about broom rapes and how she went about this investigation. It's quite a reading, but I don't have time to read it all to you today. Let's jump back to the East Coast and cast another glance at our Arabanki. It's not so colorful as in the West, but it still looks good. It looks to me like a little animal all covered with this stipitate glands. And the only smooth part is its fruit. But actually, broom rapes are not all created equal. Among them are not just these pretty harmless creatures like our Rabanchioniflora. For example, in the Old World, in the Mediterranean area, where the most important crop, one of the most important ones, is sunflower, there is a species of broom rape that is very damaging to agriculture there, particularly to the crops of sunflower. And here you can see sunflower field and this Orobantia or broom rapes that are attaching themselves at the bottom of every sunflower and greatly diminishing the crop here. And so there are some species of parasitic plants that are rare and have to be protected, but then there are other species that are economically important and they are damaging, they are detrimental to human agriculture. And so those are, of course, a subject of study. For example, this photograph I took from this scientific article of a PhD student in Germany. And so she was studying how Orobanche recognizes sunflower, how Orobanche seed can stay viable in the soil for many years, waiting for chemical signals telling them that sunflower is around, that there is something to attach to. And then they start producing haustoria and attach themselves to their host, and from that time on, they are steadily fed by the sunflower. And the sunflower, instead of developing correctly, keeps feeding this parasitic plant surrounding it. And so host recognition and these interactions with parasitic plant, with this parasitic weed and the host plant are the subject of very intense studies, because the hope is that once the mechanism is deciphered, there could be developed a remedy preventing this Orobanche, the species is Orobanche cumana, to damage cultivated sunflower. But this is just one example of a real damaging parasitic plant. Usually the damage comes not to the wild plant communities, but to agricultural crops. That's where it becomes important. But in the wild here in Massachusetts, we only have these harmless, interesting plants such as this one called squirrelroot or bear corn. And the Latin name of this unusual plant is Conophyllus americana. As you can see, this is another plant completely devoid of chlorophyll. Conophyllus can be deciphered like this. Cono stands for cone and phyllis means scale. So instead of leaves, it has this brownish little scale, and these white parts that are protruding on the sides are the flowers. They actually flower buds here because it's early in spring. It's photographed at the end of May. And the name squirrelroot has to do with the medicinal applications of this plant by the Native Americans, because squaw means woman in Native American languages, and so squirrelroot means the plant whose root is applied to treat female ailments. Here, it does remind of a cone, especially when it dries up, and in fruit too. Here is the plant late in the season in November producing ripe fruit, and it does remind of a cone, very much so. It grows under oaks, oftentimes. Here's another example. The previous one was from the Blue Hills, and this one from another eastern Massachusetts reservation north of Boston called Middlesex Fells. So some of you are probably familiar with this plant because it's only relatively rare, but it's occasionally you can see it in the forest here. And here is the range of the plant. You see that it's in eastern North American range, including far north in Canada. This is another interesting parasitic, rather common plant called beech drops or Epiphagus virginiana. Epi means over and phagus means beech. So this plant grows over beech roots. It can be parasitic only on beeches, so it's called beech drops. It's a very narrow parasitic plant. Here's what it looks like close up. These are the flowers. Again, no leaves needed for this plant. It doesn't care to produce any uh, food for itself. No sugars are formed. They are all taken through haustoria from beech roots. And you see it can be quite large. This is what the fruit look close up. They are full of tiny white seed, and they start disseminating the seed in September and go on through the winter time. They become dry in the winter but keep spreading their seed. This is, for example, seed falling off. Here you can see the seed in February. The fruits are, of course, open by that time and are nearly empty. Of course, the easiest way to notice this plant is against the snow because it's rather inconspicuous and it's often overlooked. Of course, if it forms like a very big stand and dense stand like this, you cannot overlook it, but that's not the case. Oftentimes you see just one or two. And sometimes when people come over these big clumps of beech drops, they start being worried about the beeches. Can this plant, if there are so many, damage beech roots? But actually, this is not the case. Actually, the more you see beech drops, the healthier the forest is. So beech drops are a good sign. They tell you that the forest is healthy, and when they're not there, then this is a signal that something is not quite right. Okay, friends, in order to complete our journey, um, looking at parasitic plants, we have to deal with one more interesting family now. This is an exotic one. I bet you haven't heard much about it. It's sandalwood family. And it's a tropical one, largely tropical, but we have some very interesting representatives here around. And the first one we would look at is pirate bush or Buckleya distichophylla. And this is another family whose members come in direct contact with hosts through their haustoria. The difference from what we already looked at is that this time we are dealing with big shrubs and even trees sometimes. So Santalaceae, as I said, is a primarily tropical, subtropical family, and they include trees, shrubs, perennials, and epiphytic climbers too. And this one, I apologize that I don't have a photograph, even though I worked at the Arboretum where it's cultivated for a long time, and I've been cultivated there for a long time too. But we met, but I never took a photograph. So here is a drawing of that interesting shrub that is one of the rarest shrubs in eastern North America, Buckleya distichophylla. It's a shrub that is native to southeastern United States, the area that includes North Carolina, Tennessee, Virginia, and it's even within that area it's found only in a few places. So it's very, very rare. Originally, it was thought to be living just on hemlocks. So at the Arndt Arboretum, they planted it on Hemlock Hill. But since then, they figured out that it actually has a wider range of hosts. This is considered to be the oldest cultivated plant at the Arndt Arboretum, even though it was transplanted there in 1946. It was originally collected by the venerable botanist Arthur Gray himself in 1843. That's how old this shrub is, this concrete specimen. Now it's believed to parasitize a large range of trees, shrubs, and herbaceous things. It is a dioecious plant. It's a rather tall shrub, maybe twice man's height. And here you can see this female flower and male branch, and the fruits that are pear-shaped like that. So the shrub is green, so it produces some sugars on its own, but not completely green. It's kind of pale green shrub. A very exotic thing from my perspective. So, but I want you to see another shrub from the same family, sandalwood family, that's called buffalo nut, Pirularia pubera, and Pirularia just means little pear. How appropriate, because the fruit do look like a little pears. I was unable to photograph the fruit this time because, again, these shrubs are dioecious, and the way I found it, there were only male flowers. It was just a single one. It was quite a find because it happened this year actually. See, the date is June 5, and I don't usually provide the year, but the year is 2020. And it is growing actually very close to New Bridge. It's in the reservation um, across the road from New Bridge. You can see there are green and conspicuous flowers here, um, and the color of leaves is perfectly green, but it is still parasitic on the surrounding plants, to which it attaches itself through haustoria as everything else in this family. So mycorrhiza is not involved this time. Here is where I found it. Here is the New Bridge territory. This West Street. This is the highway from which we come. Here is the entrance road. And across West Street, here is this Wilson Mountain Reservation. There's a little hill called Wilson Mountain, and the place is right here on the border of the reservation. So buffalo nut has never been recorded in the wild. So far as I know, I didn't find any records or any collection in the entire New England, let alone Massachusetts. So it was very interesting, but probably someone planted it here because I only found one plant. So I cannot really say that it is naturalized in this reservation. It didn't leave any progeny. So if you want to see the larger picture, buffalo nut is southeastern United States Appalachian uh, area shrub, can be locally abundant in the Blue Ridge Mountains, Appalachian Plateau, often forming dense stands in the second growth forest. That's what Flora of North America says about uh, buffalo nut. This species is apparently a host generalist and has been reported to parasitize planted firs in Virginia. So it can be parasitic in fir plantation, Christmas tree plantations. So this is a botanical curiosity around here in Massachusetts. If you want to see the flowers closely, they look like this. And this is the photograph that shows the inside parts of the flower. And this is the view from up from the top down. You can see the pistil here and the stamens that have very strange appendages. One side of appendage is attached to the stamen and the other side to the petal, and they look like little brushes. And this is typical for the entire family, these strange appendages. Now I wanted you to remember that sandalwood family is called after this tree, sandalwood tree. This is an Indian tree, Santalum album. This is one of the most notable of sandalwoods. There is a group of species. This is a threatened species distributed in mountainous southern India, Pakistan, and Nepal. The sandalwood is protected uh, by all these states, but many of them are cut illegally because it's so lucrative. The price is 2,000 American dollars per kilogram of wood. So it's the most expensive tree in the world. And this tree, this huge tree, is also hemiparasitic tree. It's parasitizing a range of tropical species, and the range is not fully known. Among these plants are acacias, Cisbania species, and others don't even speak to me because they are all tropical trees. We are not really familiar with them. See, the flowers look very similar, like those of they're just pear-shaped, just like Pirularia flowers, only they're different color. They are very cute pink color. But then let's look at something of this family that is widespread here in Massachusetts. Yes, there is one plant that is very common, relatively common. Uh, this is a representative of our flora here. It's subshrub, mostly herbaceous, and it's called bastard toad flax. I'm not swearing right now. It's the name. The common name just means that it is false toad flax. You can call it that way. And the Latin name is Comandra umbellata. And com means hair, and andra means male. So that uh, the name altogether means that this plant has hairy stamens. Remember we talked about those hairy appendages? Here they are, right here. This is the inside of the flower. It's a little thing with tiny flowers, and it is, again, hemiparasitic on the surrounding plants. Why does it bear this name, false um, toad flax? Here are the toad flaxes. Here is Linaria vulgaris butter index, one toad flax that comes from Europe. And here is a blue toad flax, that native plant here, Nutalanthus canadensis, that's called blue toad flax. And none of these plants resemble in any respect this false toad flax. So I was bending my mind to figure out why does it have this strange common name. Well, I think I found the answer. Look at this picture. Here is bastard toad flax growing in the Blue Hills Reservation. That's its favorite habitat, the steep rocky ledges or just steep rocks, and it growing there in crevices, surrounded by some grass over here, and here is black huckleberry. So I guess there is nothing else for it to cling to and take nutrients from, rather than huckleberry and this grass. But here in the left, I wonder if you notice that this is a different photograph, but it looks so similar that it even mingles with this one, and so you cannot really notice where one photograph is ending and the other is starting, because it's just the same rock, only this rock is far away from here. It's in Mediterranean area, and the plant looks quite similar, but it's a different plant. It's called Dalmatian toad flax, Linaria dalmatica. This is a Mediterranean species, and it produces these long shoots, very similar to those of our American bastard toad flax. And the habitat is so similar. So maybe this explains the name, I think. Here's another example of bastard toothflax growing in mild Standish state forest. And again, it's surrounded by some grasses. And here is again black huckleberry. So I believe this is not a random thing, and it has to do with attachment of bastard toadflax to black huckleberry. That's probably one of the hosts that it can live upon. So this is the only one common representative of sandalwood family in our flora. Other than that, and one more, which I'm going to show you, we don't have anything else in the flora because Santalaceae is an exotic family for us. And here is another very interesting plant from the same family. It's called dwarf mistletoe. It's a total miracle. Imagine the shrub. This is a woody plant that only has this the size of these little shoots are they are 3 centimeters long only. And this size, this plant, 3 centimeters high, never touches the ground. It spends its life on the branches of other plants, on conifers. In this case, it looks like it is growing on a hemlock. This image comes from Wikipedia, so I'm not sure which conifer that was. So the story of this plant goes like that. Let's start from a seed. The seed is clinging to the branch of the conifer. How it gets there, that's another story. We'll come to it at the end. So it grows into the branch, and for the next 10 years, it doesn't even show up on the date surface. And it spends all these years developing inside the branch and clinging to its vessels and sucking juices, sugars out of the tree. And the tree, meanwhile, can develop witch's brooms on the surface. So it starts getting sick. So after some 10 years, it finally shows up on the surface of the branch and develops this little, let's call them branches. They don't have any leaves, they only have flowers. And also this plant is dioecious as many other plants of this Santalaceae family. So on one conifer tree, be it a spruce or a hemlock or even a pine, there will be only male flowers. This plant will have only male flowers, and on other conifer, there would be a female plant. Here is my own herbarium sample of black spruce that is coming from New Hampshire. This unusual plant is rare in Massachusetts. It's state listed. But when you move farther north in New Hampshire and Vermont, then you see more and more of it. And primarily in our area, it's attaching itself to black spruce. Black spruce is best from my experience, but the literature tells us that it can grow on a wide variety of different conifers, including widespread ones like white pine, for example, or American hemlock. So it is easier to find this plant in New Hampshire, and I made it a point to find it in Massachusetts, and so I scrutinized very many black spruces and went through wetlands where they grow or surrounding the ponds, on pond shores, but I never was lucky to find a good example of this dwarf mistletoe or Arciltobium pusillum in Massachusetts. So that's why I'm showing you this sample from New Hampshire. And as with every conifers, when you dry them, make a sample, all the needles are dropped. When they dry, they don't stay on the branch. They just fall off, and what's left of them is this little uh, leftovers of the base part. And whatever you see protruding from the branch are these shoots of parasitic mistletoe. So this is a very unusual plant here in Massachusetts, and the status is a special concern. So it becomes more and more common when we go north, till at last in Canada it becomes too common, and to the point that it starts producing significant damage on the conifers there, and it becomes damaging to the forest. So in Canada, it's not appreciated very much. But here in Massachusetts, it is a kind of little botanical curiosity, and everyone is very happy if they succeed to find it. Here you can see its flower. It's a close-up view of a staminate flower, and the flower looks very strange. In fact, it has 3 petals and 3 stamens, and then pistillate plants produce a fruit 3 millimeter in diameter, and the fruit ejects sticky seed, and when it's ripe, it explodes with great force, so that the seed fly at a great speed and gets stuck to the branch of another tree, and that's how this plant propagates itself, and sort of it jumps physically from one tree to the next and never touches the ground. And then the cycle starts all over again. The seed germinates right into the branch of the tree and hides itself for a few years without showing up. And then it germinates on the branch and starts flowering. And depending if it's male or female, it produces pollen or it produces fruit. So this is a very unique tree. This is a very unique woody plant, miniature woody plant in our flora. And with this slide, I want to wrap up our conversation and just remind you that today we looked at 4 different parasitic families. So 2 of them, heath family and orchid family, are getting their nutrition through mycorrhiza, and another 2 families, broomrape family or Abancaceae and sandalwood family, don't need mycorrhiza usually for their development and attach directly to their hosts. And within each family, you can trace evolutionary lines from hemiparasitic, meaning partially parasitic plants, to fully parasitic plants, or holoparasitic, that's the official term for those, such as, for example, this one. So this is a very interesting subject for exploration, and I wish I could show you some of these plants on our grounds. At least Indian pipe is growing here on the New Bridge grounds. So at some point we will look at it together. See you in the forest. Bye, that's it for today.